So we're going to start in the chapter 5 today, but I want to jump back to chapter 4 of Matthew and talk just a little bit about audience and who Jesus was talking to. But first, this is difficult, probably impossible for us to do, but first things first, we have to really understand the Sermon on the Mount and to really understand who Jesus was talking to and what his purpose was, is we have to get out of our Western mindset. In Western society, we really tend to wall off different segments of our world and our life. We can have a great work life and a horrible home life, and we can have a great spiritual life and a horrible financial life, and we break all these things into these categories, and it may be good in this category and bad in this category. And in the Eastern mindset, and specifically in the first century mindset, all of that was tied. And I think we fool ourselves as Westerners to say, work's great, but home's horrible, or, my financial situation is awesome, but my spiritual situation is horrible, or my spiritual situation's good, but finances are just dragging me down. And I think we fool ourselves when we say that they're not tied together. But so then I want to review a couple of things in chapter 4. The key message of Jesus, I want to talk about what his whole world was about. And it's Matthew 4:17 says, "From that time on, Jesus began to preach, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near.'" And Jesus was all about kingdom and kingdom talk and kingdom language. And so then also in chapter 4, he recruits his first 4 disciples. The first 4 people it's those fishermen that don't matter to the world, and he recruited them, and they've come, and they're going to be fishers of men. And so when he does the Sermon on the Mount, he doesn't have the 12. He's not preparing them to carry on the ministry. There's 4 guys. And so we need to really look at the audience that Jesus is talking to, because it's so critical to what he's saying. So the audience that he's talking to is Jesus is later on he begins to preach, and he heals the sick, and he begins to draw a crowd, and this crowd's following him, and the crowd that's following him are the sick. And because of Rome and Roman society, they had great roads and a great society, but they had a horrible welfare system. It was nothing. There was none. So if you had sickness and you were poor, there was no solution for you. If you were not of the elite class, you were less than. And so the crowd that Jesus is drawing are these people that are less than. It's the sick, it's the wounded, it's the poor, it's the outcasts, it's the people from the other side of the tracks. It's the marginalized. And so I want to keep that in our mind as we begin to read this scripture and to understand where so this is Jesus' first big sermon, right? And so he's a rabbi, and so he starts with the Beatitudes. These are probably some of the most famous sayings of Jesus. It's the blessed are the poor in spirit. And growing up and even in seminary, we always looked at this from this Western perspective, and each of these 9 blessings, they were different groups of people, and maybe you were the poor in spirit, or maybe you were this, or maybe you were that, but I want to take another step backwards and look at the Proverbs and the teaching and the Psalms, and over again in the Psalms and the Proverbs, it's blessed is the man, or blessed is the woman, or blessed is this, or blessed is that. And it became this way of teaching in the Jewish community, and it carried on all the way into the first century. And I want to take just a second and say blessed. When you hear that term blessed, what he's talking about is right with. That's the best English term that I can come up with, is instead of saying blessed are the poor in spirit, you're saying right with God. In rightness with God are the poor in spirit. Or blessed is blessed is the man whose children honor him. That means he's blessed by God. And blessing is such a critical thing in the Hebrew culture. And you pass the blessing on to your child, and you're giving him the rightness, the right standing with God. And so now I want to jump forward a little bit, and that it become pervasive in the Jewish culture. And so most of you have probably heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that gives us, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the earliest recopying of the New Testament, of a couple of New Testament books. But this society, the Dead Sea Society that was talking about, they were really weird historically. They're eccentric people, and they had some, basically they believed that they were right and the rest of the world was going to hell. So maybe not so weird. But in that community, they had these scrolls, and there was this other guy named Jesus. His name was Jesus ben Sira, or the son of Sira. Jesus, the son of Sira. And he was a famous writer in about 100 years before Jesus came along. And he had tons of these scrolls that he had written, and they were used to teach. And that was really normal that, rabbis would say, I believe this because this rabbi said it, and this rabbi agreed, and this rabbi, and so this was a famous rabbi, and one of his most famous sections I want to read to you. It's his blessed sayings, and so this is from Jesus ben Sira, not Jesus of Nazareth, not our Jesus, this other Jesus. Blessed. There are 9 blessings that come to mind, and a 10th whom my tongue proclaims. Blessed is the man who finds joy in his children and who lives to see his enemies' downfall. Blessed is he who dwells with a sensible wife, and he who plows like a donkey yoked with an ox. Blessed is he who sins not with his tongue and serves not his inferior. Blessed is he who finds a friend, and he who speaks to attentive ears. Blessed is he who finds wisdom is great indeed, but not greater than he who fears the Lord. Fear of the Lord surpasses all. It is a processor that is beyond compare. And these blessed statements, what he was saying was, this is what our community does. We don't serve our inferior because we're blessed by God. We don't have these. So this blessed thing is, he's talking about rank and society, and their society is better, and this is how you become blessed, is you join our society and you be part of us. And that was prevalent in all of the Jewish communities. So then Jesus gets an opportunity, and he comes up and he says, okay, so now I'm going to teach you, I'm going to preach. And he says, blessed are. And if you're a first century Jew, you're sitting there, you're thinking, okay, I know what he's going to do. He's going to tell us how righteous he is, and how righteous those who follow him are, and then maybe we can get there. And Erica passed me on a podcast, and I started reading the guy's books, and the guy has just such a fascinating take, and and he's the creator of the Bible Project. So if you ever get a chance, go and explore the Bible Project. It's they illustrate scripture.
How about Trey?
Tim.
I think it's Tim.
Tim, yeah. Yeah, they do videos and art to illustrate scripture. It's really cool. But the most important thing to remember is that we're talking about one crowd, one group, one community, and he starts with this blessed, and he says blessed, and it would have been instant for the Jewish faith to say, okay, he's going to tell us who's right, who's wrong, and how we get there. And he starts with, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so, as Westerners, we think, okay, poor in spirit, is he talking about the spiritually poor? Or maybe he's talking about the financially poor, and I've heard different interpretations of both of those. And it's that Western thought where we don't tie those things together. And how can your spiritual wellness not be tied to your financial wellness? And I'm not talking about having money or not having money, but how we view money and what the importance of money. And this is, he's saying, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who the religious elite say, you are not worthy. Blessed are the poor people who the world says, you're less valuable because you don't have money. I don't want to listen to you because you don't have money. And he says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Oh, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is the guy that's all about kingdom. We're coming to set up the new kingdom based on love, not power, based on service, not war. And he says, this, the poor in spirit, yours is the kingdom. And this is probably the first time that any Jew in that crowd had heard that you're blessed. He's talking to them. And then he goes on and says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And this mourning, this angst, it's not just a mourning for loss or to be grieved or to be grieving, but they're mourning for their life situation. They've been cast down to a lower caste. They're sick, they're hurt, they're wounded, they're poor. They're not the religious elite. They're not valuable. They're not worthy. And so that they are literally in mourning for several things. A society that says you're less than. A society that there's no social justice. A society that there's no medical help for those who are poor. A society that says you are not valuable, and they're in mourning. And what does Jesus say? Blessed, because you'll be comforted. And so they're poor in spirit and they're mourning, and God is saying it's your kingdom, and it's your kingdom because your kingdom people, you're blessed. You are in right relationship with God. And because of that, you will not only inherit the kingdom of heaven, but you will also be comforted because you have kingdom standing. And so the poor in spirit and those who mourn aren't necessarily two separate groups of people, but it's this group of people. It's these 9 blessings that Jesus is talking about, who's saying, these are my people. And then he says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And he's talking about meekness, weakness, the weak, people who feel weak, not that they necessarily are weak. Moses in the Old Testament is described as meek, not because he had no power in God, but because he felt weak. And so when he feels weak and feels weakness, then he is a meek person. And so this group of people who are poor in spirit, who are mourning for their society, who feel powerless to change anything, Jesus is saying to them, even though you are meek, when the new kingdom comes and the new world is made and the recreation of this is happening, you will inherit the kingdom and the world. And I'm like, wow! So we're talking about the same people. And then he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Think of a time, like right now, I'm thirsty. Think of a time in your world where you have been hungry or thirsty. As a general rule, we are not hungry or thirsty by choice, maybe if you're fasting. But we are thrust into that situation. So maybe we are hungry or thirsty because we have no money for food or drink or clean water. That'd be awesome, Tyrus. Thank you. Will you bring that to me? And so this group of people who are hunger and thirst after righteousness, this is a group of people who maybe they're poor in spirit and they're in mourning and they're meek, and yet they are thrust in this desire for righteousness, for rightness. In the Jewish culture of law, if you stole something, you were not in right relationship. And so if you were accused of stealing your neighbor's mule or whatever, and you say, I didn't do that, and you go before the court and you are proven that you did not steal it, and you get given the verdict of righteousness. You are righteous. And these are people who are, it's why they're in the crowd. This is not the crowd of people who saw Jesus walking through their area and he saw him heal somebody, and so they were interested. They left where they were to follow him to get to the crowd. These are the people who can't do anything else but seek righteousness. They hunger and they thirst after righteousness. And that is not something that they were, that it's not a natural state. It's a state of being that is thrust upon them. And so they hunger and thirst after righteousness. And then Jesus continues and says, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And this group of people that he's talking to who are in mourning and they're poor in spirit and they're seeking after righteousness, they have no power. They are meek to change anything about their circumstance. He says, be merciful. Show mercy in some little way, and you will be shown mercy. And he's saying, here's a tool. Here's something that you can do. You have no power to change society. You have no standing. But I'm telling you, in this kingdom, you have standing and you have a tool and you can show mercy. And if you show mercy, if you're merciful, then you will be shown mercy. And he's saying to that crowd of people, you are righteous. You are in right standing. You are the blessed, not the religious elite. Not the society who says you have no value. And then he goes on and says, blessed are those who, nope, missed that. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And Tim had a great description of the pure in heart. These are the people that are They have standing in their community, not necessarily the community at large, but they're the people that people go to for advice. They seek out, but they have no desire to own that. Their ego is far below their standing or their influence. So they're not seeking stardom because they're pure in heart. They literally are seeking justice. They seek righteousness and right standing, and that is the pure in heart that Jesus is talking about. And he's saying, you people who set aside your opportunity to work, to come and hear me speak, you're seeking righteousness. You're pure in heart because you have no standing, you desire no standing, but you seek God anyway. And then he moves on to, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And that's because most peacemakers, true peacemakers, they have to be called children of God because the people that they're trying to make peace for don't really like them very much. When there are two people that can't stand each other, they don't like each other, they don't want to have anything to do with each other, Jesus is big on reconciliation, reconciling relationship. And a peacemaker is somebody who recognizes that and steps in between that relationship and says, please, I want to help you to reconcile your relationship. And as a general rule, a good peacemaker doesn't pick sides. And when you don't pick sides in an argument, both people hate you. If you try and see where you can make peace for both parties, there's usually some compromise. And when you're in an argument and mad at somebody, you don't really want compromise. You just want to be right. At least I do. So, and so then we move forward to the peacemaker of all peacemakers. Jesus is foreshadowing he is the true child of God. And then he died on the cross to reconcile relationship with a broken man to a holy God. And he made peace with the Old Testament, and he fulfilled it. And those people are real children of God. I am not a good peacemaker. I want to be. And he's challenging this community that he's told them. He's already said to them, you're the blessed. It's not the man who sees his enemy fall. It's the one who has already fallen. You're blessed. You're chosen. You're in rightness. You are in right relationship with God. I'm telling you, this is the new kingdom. These are the new blessed statements. This is the new way. And then he says these last two blessed statements. And these are really for all of the people who say, I'm in. I may be poor in spirit. I may be mourning. I may be weak. I'm seeking righteousness. I want to be pure in heart. I'm desiring that. I want to change my society. I don't like to look at our society and say, poor people are less. Broken people are less. Weak people are less. Those who don't have clean water need clean water. I don't want to be a part of that society anymore. I want to change it. And this crowd is all in at this point. And then Jesus says this, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil things about you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, kingdom. For in the same way that they persecuted the prophets who were before you, they'll persecute you. And when you step out of societal norm and try and break through and make a change in your society, you will be called all kinds of names. count yourself in right relationship with God when people hurl insults and call you names because of Jesus, because you are in right relationship. You are blessed when that happens. And we don't, at least in the United States, this is not a very persecuted society here that you're sitting in. But if we want to change it, it's going to be hard. We may become persecuted when you stand up and say, this is not right. And so Jesus, these blessed statements, these 9 statements are saying, if you're outcast, have you ever felt outcast? Have you ever felt meek and weak where you can't change anything about your situation? Poor, not only in your relationship with God, but in your finances. Jesus says, you are chosen. You are who the kingdom is about. This is my kingdom. And it's not built on power and dominance and status and society. It's built on love and mercy and grace and forgiveness. And you are blessed. You are right. And when you look at the big picture society stuff, I feel meek. You know, there are places in this world where clean water is not an option. And I think, what can I do? Bless you guys, you're blessed. And there's places in this world where African American men are persecuted and prosecuted at a rate that's ridiculous. And they're railroaded and they're put in prison. And there's a guy named Edward Yates who was convicted 20 years ago of a crime, a murder that he didn't commit. Tuesday, he got parole because of a righteous group of people. One of the things that is required for parole is to admit that you have changed from your ways and that you won't commit those crimes that you committed anymore. And he had a life sentence and had an opportunity for parole. And all he had to say was, I'm sorry for what I did. And he refused to do it. And so for the last 6 years, he's been rubber stamped to say, no parole, no parole, no parole. And this group of people, they're called the Truth and Justice Army, and they're really cool. They researched his society, they researched his group, and they got a hold of the Texas Innocence Project, and they're still working to prove his innocence, but they got a lawyer that represented him and said, listen, he's never going to admit that he did it because he didn't do it. He was railroaded. And it happens again and again and again, and today he's with his wife and his children, and they're still working to prove his actual innocence. But that small group of people, when they banded together and worked together, they pooled their resources and they worked as a team. They made this huge change, and they're doing it again and again and again and again in case after case after case. And that Those are people who hunger and thirst after righteousness, after rightness. They can't do anything when they see something wrong in society. They can't do anything but say, I have to respond. You are blessed. It's not groups of people that he's talking about. He's talking about this group of people. You are God's people. And let's change our world.